On behalf of editor Jerry Kern and all of my Chicago Tribune colleagues, welcome. I'm Joyce Winicki. I'm the vice president and associate editor at the Chicago Tribune. So about this young adult genre, I have one. And she's somebody who seems to read more than she breathes, so I am especially proud and pleased to introduce tonight this rock star panel of authors. The Tribune has long been a champion of books, authors, and writing. Each week we publish Printers Row Journal, a weekly literary journal for people who are passionate about books, writing ideas, and the discussion all around them. So it's reviews and essays and profiles and discussion of writing, and also a piece of original fiction. And if you probably have a copy, if you don't, get one on your way out. It's the journal and the fiction, and consider subscribing if you don't already. So tonight's program will include a brief Q&A, and then the authors will sign books. So after the program, we ask that you remain seated just for a minute until we open the theater doors for the book signing. Also, please take a minute to fill out the survey card. We take those very seriously and refine our programs based on your feedback with those. So we're thrilled to have Veronica Roth and Garth Nix with us tonight. So Veronica is a local. She grew up in Barrington and lives in Chicago now. And Chicago, of course, is all over her Divergent series. ChicagoTribune.com, in case you don't know, has a really cool little photo gallery that runs through all of the Chicago landmarks that are in the first movie, and including that big scene where they do the battle. I think it's 900 South Wells Street, so check that out if you haven't seen it. And I think they're filming, actually I know they're filming the Insurgent movie in Chicago now, so that's the Chicago part. But then you have a word with Garth Nix, and you don't hear so much Chicago. He's a prolific writer, mostly in the young adult space, and we're here tonight to talk about his Old Kingdom series, of course. The newest is Clariel, the prequel to his great trilogy. Two of his greatest fans are here tonight. One is Veronica Roth, and the other is Australia's Consul General Brent Hall. So we thank you for being with us tonight. Leading the conversation is Jenniffer Weigel, a writer for the Chicago Tribune and a friend and treasured colleague of mine. She's also the author of 3 books herself. So please join me tonight in welcoming Jenniffer, Garth, and Veronica.
Is this thing on? Can you all hear us? All right, let's do a test. Whoa, yeah. Let's do a test. Garth and Veronica, say hello. Tell us what you had for breakfast. That's what I say before every interview.
Really? You really want to know what I had for breakfast?
If it's interesting, yes.
It wasn't very interesting.
Okay, we can hear you. Excellent. Veronica,
Very
say
good.
hello to us. See?
Hello? Oh,
There we go. Wonderful.
my face.
No, there you don't.
That's no.
Here, I bet you if you let it go. Now try again. And now a miming dance from Veronica Roth.
Didn't know I'd be.
There we go. There he is. Woohoo!
Is it?
This is such a joy. I got to interview Garth and Veronica. She's going to sing some show tunes later, too. It's still not working. Can we get a handheld for Veronica?
You tell me what you want to say, and then I'll repeat
Right.
it to the audience.
Stomp twice for
be like-
yes.
It could be like Chinese whispers. It could be a lot of fun.
Wait, I can just hold it like this.
Okay, except that's probably annoying for you, yeah?
You know, that's all right.
You know what it does? It seems to like pause in the first syllable.
Yeah.
So it's like, let's do this interview in haiku. Okay. See? No, seriously, guys, can we get a handheld for Veronica? Is that a possibility? Because I worry for the future. This is all part of the gig. You guys didn't know this, but we rehearsed this backstage. We did great. Okay, I'm so grateful to have both of you. I'm going to give Veronica my microphone, but I have a feeling a handheld is coming. I want to know from, I did talk to you all beforehand for the print version that I did, a conversation. Do you remember we were having some Skype issues, Garth, with our connection? Because you were in Great Britain at the time.
It's probably my fault. I bring technical issues to any conversation involving
Apparently
the three
you
of us.
do. Note to self.
That doesn't work.
That one doesn't work either.
Maybe they just haven't. No.
Seriously.
I think you're a gremlin.
Bring Veronica more microphones. We need
Yes,
more.
can we have a few more
microphones.
options? Right? I'll trade with you. They don't
don't
really
know if
need to
that
hear
will
me. They need to hear her
Wait.
more.
Oh.
Hey.
Okay.
Happy birthday. It's not your
That's
birthday.
very nice.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for being here, both of you. I am very inspired by your writing. I've been inhaling what you do, and I know a lot of people here have as well. So for many people who are here in the audience, your books are probably on their nightstands. I would like to know, when you were getting inspired, what books were on your nightstand? Was it Mists of Avalon? Was it, what was it that kind of got you into this genre, that hooked you and made you feel that this was something you could do? Let's start with you, Garth.
I think it was all the books I ever read. I mean, I think I've been influenced by everything I've ever read, for good or ill. But certainly growing up, the books, and there's many, many books that have had big influences upon me. And sometimes they're obvious influences, and sometimes they're far less obvious. I mean, I think, for example, that Tolkien had an enormous effect upon me, even though I don't write that kind of fantasy with elves and orcs and hobbits and a Dark Lord and so on. But I think some of the sort of themes of Tolkien came across, and a lot of my fiction, I think, I've adopted Tolkien's themes of responsibility, of people having to assume roles that are beyond them, but they grow to them, and they do what needs to be done, and then they have to pay the price. So I think Tolkien was a very, very big influence. In fact, I'm wearing one of his old suits at the moment. I bought this on eBay. It's a suit Tolkien.
It's an original.
Tolkien used to wear, or so I'm told. The label doesn't seem to reflect that, but anyway, I like to think that at this moment I'm channeling my inner Tolkien in the choice of my clothing. So Tolkien was a big influence, but there are many, many others. I think Alan Garner, the British fantasy writer who wrote The Weird Stone of Brisingamen, was a tremendous writer. His book, The Owl Service, I mean, possibly these are books that you don't know, but I think they're very worthwhile seeking out. The Owl Service, which was also made into a very strange television series, I've always said if I could write 2 pages as lyrical and as emotional as the last 2 pages of The Owl Service, I would be a very happy author. So he had a huge effect upon me in his storytelling, in his ability to transfer emotion to the reader. But many, many others. Susan Cooper was a big influence. Her The Dark is Rising, and a few years ago I was incredibly pleased to be able to get her to sign my copy of The Dark is Rising that I had since I was 12. So that was a big deal for me. Lloyd Alexander, his Chronicles of Predane. Lots of fantasy, but also lots of historical fiction. The classics, I love Dickens, I love Dumas, I love Jane Austen. I'm a huge Georgette Heyer fan. I love her Regency romances in particular. I love a lot of detective stories and thrillers, and all these things have fed into the fiction that I write. So there are just so many fantastic books, and of course, there's more to discover all the time. There's always new great books as well as old great books, to find out.
They're always going. How about you, Veronica?
Well, in the interest of playing it cool, I'm just going to pretend like I did not read your books when I was a child over and over again.
Well, thank you.
Let's breeze past that for a moment. Yeah, I mean, I think when I really loved reading was at the age that I currently write for. I mean, the books are for whoever will read them, but you always have kind of an idea in mind of who the reader will be, at least at some point in the writing process, even if it's at the very end. But so when I think about influences, I guess I think about those books I devoured, like, I don't know, at the breakfast table I used to get yelled at for reading by my mother.
So did I.
She made up a lie. She's in the audience, so I feel like I can tell this. She told me that I would ruin my digestive system, or
Like swimming too soon after you
Yeah,
eat? You
and
can't read
it was
too
only
soon.
later that I was like, oh my God. I was like 21 years old when I realized that is not true.
Well, she was worried about you getting your digestion and getting your protein.
Well, I think she just wanted to interact with me at one point during the day. I was like a little bit sullen, so it was probably hard to get me to talk.
Right.
Anyway, books. My first introduction to dystopian fiction was in 5th grade with The Giver by Lois Lowry, which is a beautiful book. And one thing that I have always loved in fiction is when the action of the story doesn't take away from the emotion of the characters, and I think holding those two things in tension is very difficult, but something that I've always admired. I think also I grew up with Harry Potter. I was 11 when Harry was 11, and if I can go through one event without talking about Harry Potter, I will die of shock. So I read those books. I mean, they like ushered me into adulthood in some significant ways, so they're very important to me. I also loved A Wrinkle in Time and all of the associated books by Madeleine L'Engle. I think she's kind of brilliant. Everything is very complicated, but in a way that I love. At the time that I wrote Divergent, though, I was in college, so I was drawing a lot from the courses that I was taking. I was taking a class on the coming-of-age novel, so I read Housekeeping by Marilynne Robinson, which was pretty significant for me, which sounds odd because I cannot write even a fraction as well as Marilynne Robinson writes. I mean, she's amazing. So to say that it's like an inspiration in any way seems odd. But she's, I don't know, maybe...
I feel that way about many of my inspirations.
Yeah.
I mean, I was talking about Alan Garner and how beautifully and brilliantly he writes, but there's so many of them that write so much better than I do, but they still inspire me. I guess they inspire you to try.
Right.
You know, to try and get close and...
to fight through crippling self-doubt.
Yeah, exactly.
But speaking of
To go
crippling
on.
self-doubt, to soldier on, one of the through lines I'm finding with successful writers is that they had the urge to read and write very young. And I'm sure you get asked a lot, you frequently ask questions in your websites and such, is how do I get my book out? How do I get published? And I feel like the through line is you have to be really a good writer, first of all, but that requires really absorbing and knowing the language, not ending sentences in a preposition unless that's the inner dialogue of the character you're writing for. But I think that sometimes a lot of people want to take shortcuts. Would you all agree, or do you think that they want to put in the hard work and it's kind of a combination of both? Do they realize how much goes into being a talented and successful writer? You have to start young, you have to stick with it, and you have to be really diligent about it.
I don't know, you do have to start young. I mean, there are quite a few examples of people who started extremely late.
Yeah. You started at 6?
I may have started at 6, but,
Yeah.
or thereabouts.
Yeah.
But there was certainly, I mean, there's the people who started in their 60s or 70s and wrote,
Right.
very successful books.
Find it later.
So I'm not sure about the starting young. I think there has to come a time where you just want to do it above all else, and you just keep doing it until something happens. And if you give up, then nothing will happen, of course. So, but at the same time, even if you do the writing and you keep working at it, there's quite an element of luck involved as well in all these things. If you do the work, you create the possibility of something which but still may or may not happen. But of course, keeping on doing it keeps on creating that possibility.
I agree with that very much, because I know so many very, very talented people who it doesn't happen for them. And to say that it's all about perseverance and skill and not at all about luck does a disservice to those people. But I also find that people are very intimidated by writing, and so they try to find these exercises that will kind of help them out of it, almost. But it's actually very simple and kind of dull, like the idea of it. It's like, just sit down with the blank page and attack it every day. That's like the only advice that really matters.
You can kind of trick yourself, though. I mean, I still do this. I trick myself I'm not writing a novel. I tell myself I'm writing a chapter. I just have to write a chapter. It's only 2,000 or 3,000 words. I can do that. And then eventually I'm kind of surprised, well, I've written enough chapters.
Am I an
it's a book.
underachiever if I say, let's just start with a page?
Well,
Yeah.
well, exactly.
page.
Start
A
with
sentence, really.
I like a
Just
sentence
one.
today.
Yeah.
and keep going.
Well, that brings me to the process. Liz Gilbert said every morning she has to sit down and at least write for 2 hours, and it's like a 9 to 5 thing where she sits at her, at the computer and goes. Some other people hole up in a hotel room for 5 days and they just write until they get hungry or thirsty or sleepy. What is your process?
Yeah, a lot of those people die. It's not a good technique.
Not recommended. No.
Okay. What's your process? Let's start with you, Veronica.
I think my process is desperation.
Okay.
That's how I've decided
Deadline
to summarize
driven?
it.
Deadline
No,
driven?
no, not even that.
Okay.
Yes, a lot of the time, but I think it's desperation to get the story finished, no matter what it takes. So, and that changes depending on the project, depending on whatever I'm doing. So sometimes the story requires a daily schedule to meet a deadline, and sometimes it requires like letting myself have some fallow time. That's what I call it, when I just like rest and try to take things in, so that I have more food for writing. So I've written in crazy obsessive bursts, and I've written regularly every day, and all it is driven by is just the desire to tell the story. So I'll take any writing advice that I can find. I will try any exercise that I can, as long as it gets the story written eventually.
Okay.
That's
how
a
about
good.
you guys?
I think that's a very wise approach, because there is no one way to write a novel.
Right.
There's so many different ways. People find different ways. They find different routines. They find different processes. They change them. I try and write every day, but if I don't, it doesn't really matter. I just try and catch up at some point. And I suppose I'm always just trying to do some work most of the time. And I wrote half my books. Probably the first dozen or so books I wrote when I had very busy full-time jobs. And I used to just write a couple of hours twice a week in the evening, and then I'd try and write every Saturday or Sunday afternoon for 3 or 4 hours. And if you do that regularly and you force yourself to say, okay, this is the writing time, I have to do it because I'm so busy every other time, and in a year you can write a book. You can write the first draft of a book in a year sticking to that. But I've changed that around. I mean, since I've been a full-time writer, which is 14 or 15 years, I flipped it around so I write in working hours, like classic 9 to 5 working hours, and some of that was in a room a spare room in my house, or an apartment and then house, but for a lot of it I've had a separate office which I walk to. But I also agree. I think fallow time, recharging time, is incredibly important. And so sometimes you need not to write. You need to go and walk, and you need to go and see a film or see other people's art to reinvigorate your own.
You know, it was interesting. I think I was far more efficient and productive when I was in school writing at the same time, because I had to cram all the writing time into all the little spaces in the schedule, and I was so grateful to have it. Anytime I could find it, I was like, yes, I get to do the thing that I like more than this paper on whatever. Obviously, I retained a lot of information from school. So I didn't take it for granted in a way. I just used it better.
I think that's again, it's the old adage, if you want something done, you give it to a busy person. And in fact, the first time I became a full-time writer, I went from being incredibly busy in my day job and writing a book a year at night. And all of a sudden, I could economically be a full-time writer. So I decided, yay, I've always wanted to be a full-time writer. So I'm going to be one. And I quit my job, and for the next year, I was a full-time writer, and I wrote practically nothing because I didn't have to do it.
Just
I
like
had the whole
sitting in your
year.
pajamas staring at a wall.
Exactly, yeah.
I should be writing right now.
Well, it's like, no, I didn't even think that. I was like, I'll do it next week. I'm a full-time writer. I've got all the time in the world. I'll start that next month. Oh no, it's December and it's due, And so I went back to work part-time to try and reassemble a structure around which to work. And then the next time, where I thought I'll become a full-time writer, I was much more sensible about it and made sure I structured my life that to make sure that my lazy brain would need to fit the writing in between other things as well, because that seems to be the only way it would make it work.
Did you ever find yourself, as you go back to works later, after they're done, finding characters that you fall in love with differently or maybe don't relate to as much? I mean, is your relationship with your characters evolve as you go back to the work later on? Has that ever happened?
I can see a certain edginess of trying not to answer that question from both of us. I don't go back very much
You don't go
if I
back?
can avoid it. To me, the books, when they're finished, they feel like kind of like a grown-up child who's gone into the world, and you've done everything you can for them, and you try and help them along when they come out. You know, you do all the promotion and so on, which is kind of like assisting your adult child to get a place in life, and then they are what they are. You can't. I'm not one of these authors who wants to go back and do, you know, a different authorized version or something like that, which happens occasionally. You know, the director's cut version of the novel, or they put back in the 20,000 words that were cut out, usually for good reason.
Cut out.
So
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't go back.
Affirmative. Cut for a good reason, never to see the light of day.
Yeah.
So I don't go back, but I'm curious. Do you?
I don't, not really. But I've had to, because if I want to help people to preserve continuity with the books when
Yeah.
they're making the films, then I have to know what's in the books. And sometimes I'm really surprised by what's in there, because it's been so long. Well, not Divergent, because I read that a lot more times
Yeah.
than I read Insurgent. So I'm shocked by things in Insurgent, like, did that whole plot movement happen? Was I there?
But I think that's healthy, because I mean I did have to go back and reread all the Old Kingdom books and also lots of my notes to write Clariel to make sure
Right.
that, and I did find lots of things, and I knew I'd written them, but you do have that strange sensation that it was written by someone else, even though you remember every part of writing it. It is a very strange separation, and you do forget it. But I think that's probably quite healthy, because it enables you to do new things and move on.
And sometimes it's good, like, hey, that was a great decision.
Right.
Good job, old me.
Old me. Yay, 2008 me. Whee!
Yeah.
Well, I do occasionally think, old me, gee, old me was a great writer. You know,
Why can't I get
know.
that back?
Have you ever had to fight for a chapter? You talk about cutting being good, but have you ever had to fight to keep something in that you were glad you did?
I mean, it's interesting. I mean, my typical reaction to an editorial letter where there is a big change is, oh, that's absolute rubbish, you know, that poor fool. And then the next day after I've thought about it, it's more like, actually, I think I'm the poor fool, and they're absolutely right. You know, one of my editors once pointed out that a character was entirely extraneous to the whole book. That if you took out everything the character said and did, it made no difference whatsoever to the entire story. And of course, that made me furious at first. I thought, I love that character. That character is actually unessential. You know, it took me a while, and I went through and I took out everything, and the book was all the better for it.
I have that initial reaction also. It's like, get away from my book. I'm brilliant. You know nothing about this story. Everything is obvious that you had a problem with, blah, blah, blah. And then about 12 hours later, I'm like, oh, you were right about everything. I think it's healthy. You go through like the stages of grief. You have to let it go slowly.
Right.
That said, I have very rarely had a problem with it when an editor has, in my view, rightly or wrongly, you know, completely failed to comprehend what I was trying to do and wanted to change it in ways that I didn't want to do. And ultimately, it is always your book. And so you make the final decisions. And I've made final decisions which were against editorial advice at various points, which seem to have mostly worked out. So I always weigh it up. I mean, I always tell myself, don't let my initial reaction rule my decision. But certainly there have been times where I've also thought, no, it needs to stay as it's written, despite concern from various quarters.
It's sort of a silly example, but I did fight for the word sucks. Because at the end of the third book, there's a character that says, life really sucks sometimes, because I'm like super profound, and that's... and my editor, who's our editor right now...
Yes, Catherine Teagan.
Yes, Catherine Teagan, who's wonderful, was like,
a great editor.
Can they say stinks instead? I don't like the word sucks. And I was like, no stinks. Back and forth. Every draft, she would put stinks in, I would take it out. She would put it in, I would take it out. And eventually she was like, fine. So, sorry, that's...
No, but it's like malarkey. It's not going to fly, you know? No.
Well, it means something different. It actually does change the meaning. I mean, I have these little minor, word skirmishes occasionally as well, with all, different editors in different countries sometimes too, where they want you to change things.
For me, this was kind of a generational difference, I think, because I think I don't want to like call her old. She's not like old, but she doesn't
my
understand
my
why.
age, actually.
Yeah.
So technically, actually old, yes.
But you know,
Older.
she like hates the word sucks for some reason. But for me, it's just people say that all the time.
Editors also sometimes have weird pet hates.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, when I was an editor at one point, and I'm sure I had my bizarre pet hates. And,
Is that pet peeve for?
Oh, pet peeve, yes,
Okay.
yeah.
I just
So here we
heard-
go. We're actually having
Right?
a little word difference here.
Pet
you know.
hates. I'm going to use that
Yeah.
one.
Do you sucks? Is he okay? You know?
Yeah. Well, is the brother that I met before the show the one that has Tess, the dog?
Tris, the dog.
I'm sorry. It was Tess.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so Tris the dog. Now, have you ever had someone tell you they have a Tobias dog?
No.
Okay. Does anyone here have a Tobias dog or cat? There's still time. How do you feel when people name their pets after your characters? We talked about this a little over the phone in our.
Well, you've got animals.
But Tris, yeah.
Well, I've got animals in the books, and
Yes,
so
yes.
actually it's perfectly fine. I mean, and they're also, children named after the characters as well. There's quite a few, little real life Sabriels
Really?
wandering around, yeah, and a few
Life
Mirror.
Sabriels.
Cool.
Are there any Trisses that you know of that are like, we'll find out
sure-
in 10 years, they'll
I'm
be
sure-
like
I'm
the
sure
fourth
there
grade
are.
Trisses?
There might be. I haven't encountered.
Well,
Okay.
they email. I mean, people email and say, they let me know. I mean, I did find a little bizarre. There was one couple who wanted to name one of their children after one of the bells. And I thought maybe that's going a little bit far. Like think of the child, a middle name perhaps, but,
You're named after a bell that sends people back into death. Aren't you so glad?
I could just see the schoolyard conversations,
Well, the whole process of your writing, it's interesting. When I was doing my research on the two of you, Veronica, you were blogging about a lot of things, and I found a lot of talks that you did, Garth, but it's not like you were blogging as much about your experiences because you've been writing for
There were no
long
blogs.
time. There was no blogging going on when you were first
Back
writing.
when I was writing on vellum in the monastery,
So,
there wasn't a lot of blogging going on.
but you were writing long. You talk about writing longhand,
yes,
and
yeah.
So, who here, by clapping, tell me, has watched the video of Veronica taking a bath with marshmallows?
So glad it's not that many of you.
Okay, well, it's adorable, and you talk about doing that when you get the book deal, and you and it's your publisher. You take a bath with marshmallows. 42 bags of marshmallows
Yes.
you put
yeah.
inside.
Well, I made an internet promise.
You made an
and
internet
Now
promise.
I've learned my lesson.
Yes, well, that's one of the.
Which lesson was it? Don't have a bath full of marshmallows, or don't make internet promises?
Don't make internet promises that you aren't comfortable keeping. I mean, I was fine with taking a bath full of marshmallows because secretly I've always wanted to do that. And but the hard part is that I was mortified by buying that many marshmallows at the grocery store because that sort of thing makes
You had to
me
make
feel.
2 trips.
Yeah, because
right?
they ran out of marshmallows. And the lady was like, "What is this for?" And I said, "School project."
Right, exactly. Making a community out of marshmallows. And they were dirty and stickier than one would ever have
Well, you
thought.
think like, oh, it's not that sticky, but your body weight crushes it, and then it gets stuck to the. You have to like pour boiling water on it. It took forever, and then I threw away this huge sack of marshmallows, which made me feel sad for the marshmallows. Have you ever taken a bath in marshmallows?
Yes.
No, and strangely, I'm not that tempted.
Yeah.
After that description, I don't really feel like I want to do it.
Did you have a celebratory thing that you did for your first deal?
Well, my first American book deal, which was a big thing, I got an email, and I was in my office, and I was in a public relations firm at the time. In my brief stint away, I mostly worked in book publishing, but at one point I got tired of how badly paid people in book publishing are, and so I went to work for a public relations firm who apologised for only offering me twice what I used to get paid as an editor. Oh. And I was like, I think that's okay. But I got this email. It was for a 2-book deal in America, and I got up and I actually started banging my head against the bookcase, and the books all fell out. And then all these people rushed to my office to see why I'd gone suddenly crazy,
Right.
and was banging my head against the bookshelf. And I had to try and explain it. It was kind of difficult to explain how the two were related.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not clear.
Yeah, it was just a spontaneous thing. I guess the fact I'd also been out to lunch with one of our clients who made us drink a lot had something to do with it as
Oh,
well.
okay.
So I suppose the full disclosure would be a drunken person reading an email, suddenly staggering,
banging their head
against. I mean, at least it was the books. It wasn't the actual wooden part, you know. It was just the books.
You were making a strong connection with books.
I was, that's right. I was celebrating with the books.
Yes,
That was my feeling. You
as
know.
it should
It was
be.
I wanted to be
Reading
close to them. Yeah.